Hey guys, I'm Alex, and today in this video blog I'll be talking about the different stereotypes against Russians in video games. Nowadays, Russian characters in most video games tend to follow a certain trend and pattern, and it's about time for a change. But first, let's talk about what Russians are. Believe it or not, Russians are totally ordinary people, like everyone else. We're all the same people, but sometimes there are some exaggerations. Media and the internet can create a lot of different stereotypes for Russian people. Some of them are portrayed as being mentally slow and less intelligent compared to other people. Another example is that they're portrayed a lot of Russians being manly in a sort of way. And another example are Russians being portrayed as drunks. I mean, with this kind of behavior, who can take Russians seriously? It's not only the internet that simplifies Russians, but the video game industry does it as well. Today I'll be specifically focused on two stereotypes. One, that all Russians are either extremely buff or macho, and two, that they are extremely violent people. One of the most notable examples of a buff Russian video game character would be the iconic Street Fighter character, Zangief. He's a textbook example of this stereotype. I mean, look at him. He's the type of man who battles bears in the Siberian tundra when he's not doing lariats and suplexes on other poor victims. I mean, look at this. Martial power folio! Zangief wins. Now that we met one of our Russian celebrities, let's meet the Heavy. Meet the Heavy. He's the mascot character of the famous cartoon multiplayer first-person shooter Team Fortress 2. He's a typical strong, but mentally slow Russian character we portrayed near the beginning of the video. He wields a gigantic minigun which he uses to kill tiny little men, and he seems to find that amusing. Now, he may be mentally slow, but
some people think they can outsmart me. Maybe. I've yet to meet one that can outsmart Bullet. Cry some more.
Well, we met the Heavy, but it doesn't end here. Ladies rejoice, as it's not only men who experience this stereotype, even the Russian women seem to consume too much protein in their diet. A recent example would be Alexandra Zarenova, or Zarya for short, from the new Blizzard FPS game, Overwatch. She fits the stereotype perfectly. Huge, buff, and even wields a huge gun. Well, what can you say? Even old ladies seem to be able to lift more than men. Now, moving on. Now we are going to talk about our next major stereotype, how Russians are seen as very violent people. Nowadays, almost all FPS games portray some of their main antagonists as Russians. Including their AK-47s, they're seen as being very anti-American. The Call of Duty game seems to portray this example exceptionally. Now for our first example, meet Vladimir Makarov, one of the most evil video game characters anyone can imagine. We first get to know this guy as players get to play as an undercover agent in the CIA. Through this controversial mission, he is automatically portrayed as the scum of the earth. The player is made to shoot innocent civilians and police in a Russian airport. This sparks a huge divide and problem in the entire world. I mean, this man literally started World War III and is responsible for tons of chaos and civilian deaths in the Call of Duty world. Now, this trend of violent Russians in video games wasn't just in video games. They're also portrayed in other media to cause fear to people during the Cold War. The Soviet Union was made to seen as the enemy and people were to be feared of communism. But that is a totally different topic, so let's stray away from that. Now let's talk about mercenaries. Most of the time, villains in some video games planning their evil deeds, they need some foot soldiers, and most of the time they use mercenaries. Ruthless soldiers who would do anything for a paycheck. And a lot of times, these people are of Russian nationality.
The Soviet soldier. A lot of them came from Central Asia before, but lately they've been using more and more Russians.
An example of Russian mercenaries being used in video games is the Metal Gear Solid series. Here you face a lot of variety of enemies, but most of the time you're spent fighting and sneaking in within a Russian mercenary camp. Well, in the end, we don't get a lot of variety in video games when it comes to certain nationalities. A lot of times, certain aspects of a country are heavily exaggerated onto their people. It's not that hard to add some variety into the vast characters video games can give us. Whenever I see an overly muscular character and see that he or she is Russian, I'll be like, of course, why wouldn't it be? Sadly, it may be later in the future when video game industries realize that variety and not some blatant stereotype is necessary to help us identify a certain nationality. Feels bad, man.